This performance task is based on a process described by Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe, who used them as a central component of their Understanding by Design process. It also incorporates some suggestions from the folks at CLA in the Classroom who have developed the Collegiate Learning Assessment. This is a quick and dirty explanation of the process we use to develop this assessment in Henrico County. The general idea of a performance task is that it should require students to complete an authentic task, as authentic as possible, that they might encounter in the real world. It can target any content area. This example, developed with teachers in Henrico County, focuses on outcomes many describe as 21st century skills, and so it includes content knowledge and skills across several domains. As teachers, we develop a lot of academic tasks, in which the only audience is usually the teacher. These tasks are important, but that's not the purpose of a performance task. A performance task requires students to do something that could reasonably be asked outside of school. And so we tried to find an audience like that for this task. And like real-world problems, they're often messy and don't have one clearly correct answer. In fact, there may be no right answer, or many. It's much more about the reasoning and creative processes students go through as they analyze and evaluate a variety of data, some of it erroneous or messy, and then justify their solution. In the cell phone debate, I got to work with 4 great teachers from Henrico County who determined that debating the use of cell phones would be a real-world situation that 8th graders in their classes would relate to. And they were right. The entire setup for the students is presented via video. In this case, a mock newscast, because part of the focus of 21st century skills is understanding and using a variety of media. CLA in the Classroom encourages the problem to be situated within a dichotomy, in which students are forced to take a side, which bumps up the critical thinking required to solve the problem. Of course, our dichotomy was to decide whether students should be allowed to use cell phones in school or not, and to justify their position. Another feature of the model proposed by CLA in the Classroom is that the performance task includes a document library that contains all the information necessary for students to solve the problem and propose a solution. This was especially helpful in several ways. One, because while we want to encourage students to conduct internet research, most people are still notoriously poor at searching the web because it's just so vast, and these poor skills could have impacted whether students could actually solve the problem or not. Having the document library also helped in terms of managing the task. All the information the students needed was there. In the CLA model, as in the real world, the document library may also contain conflicting or simply just a lot of information. The teachers and I based our document library on this general idea, but we made several key changes. The first was that it should contain only truthful information. It should also be presented through a range of media and include verbal, visual, and numerical data so that students could apply a range of skills from their core classes. Our first document was an email from a fictitious security institute, although the issues and information in the email are based on real data from a national school security organization. This is the one document I think I would change if I did this again, not because the information wasn't accurate, but that the email implies bias against one of the school board members in the scenario. We wanted to use an email, though, because it's a different level of authority than a news article or a research paper or their textbook. The kids never picked up on the bias anyway, and it felt a little dishonest compared to all the other sources. Maybe next time we could address it to the entire school board or the division instead of one school board member, because one class was just captivated by the very real information that pagers, beepers, and cell phones have been associated with the drug trade and gang activity. We wanted to be sure to include some information that sounded like research, but had to represent both sides. The article from Virginia Tech is actually opinion, but it sounds somewhat like research because it's by someone with a PhD, and it's from Virginia Tech. That's an authority the students are sure to have heard of. It's also had the added benefit of a topical cartoon, which our English teacher asked we try to include in our document library because her standards included understanding political and other messages in cartoons. The article appears exactly as originally published, used with permission of course, but it's also dated in terms of the type of cell phones available today. Contrasting the article against cell phone use is one that also sounds a little researchy, but is actually a review I wrote summarizing some early research and teaching projects using cell phones. Hey, I have a PhD, and that carries some perceived level of authority, right or wrong, so it was important to include to contrast with the author from Virginia Tech. I also used to work for an educational research laboratory, and I used to write briefs like this all the time, so it really wasn't much of a stretch. This is a case where we didn't just find a resource on the web, but had to compile it from multiple sources. Of some interest is that we created a second version of each research piece at a lower reading level. We used the readability scale on Microsoft Word, which you can too, and I learned how to write simple sentences using an active voice, at least for this assessment. These versions of the documents allow a wider number of students to participate fully in the task. Following the lead of CLA in the classroom, and at the request of our math teacher, we also included numerical data in different formats. There are two sets of somewhat related data in tables, and then a column chart relating some of that data. Unlike the CLA in the classroom model, we used only real data, and that was a little tricky. We did use data from 5 real middle schools in Henrico County, but after some debate, we went with pseudonyms. There are actually 12 middle schools in the division, which, if the students read the email in the document library, they would find out. But if we had used data from all 12 schools, the patterns we found in this data would not exist. I'm not sure any students really determined that we used a non-random set of 5 schools, which would have called into question the validity of the data. The enrollment, performance, and disciplinary data is all real. The number of students with cell phones is based on reported national average because we didn't have time to find out how many kids actually had cell phones. Several of the students did figure out that the percentage, which was 75%, caused them to question some of the data. And while the data sounds impressive and relevant, of course, some of it is irrelevant to the problem. Cell phone ownership has no relationship or proven relationship in this scenario to achievement or discipline. The column chart shown both in the document library and on the newscast is one that looks pretty reasonable. And it is used in a way common to propaganda in some media messages. It also helped meet our math teacher's request to include different kinds of numeric and visual data. The final set of data is based on a real poll found on the internet, I believe for an education class, but set in a fictitious local radio station. Locals may notice the Richmond skyline in the header, which is a small touch, but again, we were really trying to make it seem as realistic as possible. We wanted to include some kind of podcast from the beginning, again to bring in different forms of data. The poll allowed us to include information from both sides of the situation and introduced information from a different level of authority, in this case, potential parents. These could actually be parents of someone they knew. You and I might identify that as opinion, but parents have a unique position of authority with middle school kids. The responses are fictitious compilations from responses found on the survey, but are pretty true to the sentiment. In my observations, this was the one item in the document library accessed the least by students, probably because it appeared last, and many of the kids rushed right into creating their product. It was a fun way to bring in audio data, though. In terms of work input, it probably took 2 full 8-hour days to find all the relevant information, create all the rough drafts, and then revise them after input from all the teachers. I created all the HTML, PDF, audio, and graphic elements, and Tom Woodward created the video with the help of what I hope was a not-too-reluctant Jen Maddox. I can't thank Tom, Jen, and the teachers enough, adding this on top of all the other work they had to do, but they were great and really invested in the whole process. The end result was a thoroughly engaging task with a range of students in the 4 schools where these teachers taught.